The cold morning light pressed against the tall glass facade of Northbridge Retail Group's headquarters, sliding down the polished marble of the lobby and pooling in long pale rectangles across the floor. Inside, the air held that particular kind of silence found in expensive places, the kind that demanded posture from everyone who entered. Soft footsteps echoed off stone. A single elevator chime broke the hush every few minutes. Receptionists murmured into low headsets behind a curved desk, built from black walnut and brushed steel. The waiting chairs along the far wall were upholstered in cream leather, lined up under a wall of recessed lighting, each one occupied by a candidate hoping not to fidget. Finn Mercer stood near the entrance with his daughter's small hand wrapped around two of his fingers. He wore a clean white shirt that had been ironed twice that morning, dark slacks, and a pair of leather shoes he had polished with shoe cream borrowed from a neighbor. The shirt cuffs were slightly worn at the edges, but unless someone leaned in closely, no one would notice. Finn was 29, tall, broad through the shoulders in a way that came from real labor rather than Jim Mears, with dark brown hair cut short and a steady jaw that made strangers underestimate his patience. There was a tiredness in his eyes that he had stopped trying to hide 3 years ago. His daughter Bonnie was 6. She wore a pale blue coat buttoned all the way to the top and held a stuffed rabbit so loved that the fur on its ears had thinned to the color of old paper. The rabbit had belonged to her mother, who had died in a small hospital room while Bonnie was still learning to read. Finn had kept the rabbit in a drawer for 1 full year before he finally placed it in Bonnie's arms. Since then, the rabbit had not left her side. Finn knelt down to her level near the visitor sign-in. He smoothed the collar of her coat and tucked a strand of light brown hair behind her ear. "You sit in the big chairs," he said softly. "You hold Mr. Whiskers. You stay quiet. And if everything goes well, we get pancakes on Saturday." Bonnie nodded with a small smile, but her grip on his fingers tightened just before she let go. He stood, took a steady breath, and walked to the reception desk to confirm his interview slot. While he waited for the receptionist to type his name, the front doors opened again, and a young woman walked in. She did not announce herself. She did not wave to anyone. She simply stepped into the lobby the way some people step into a familiar room. She was 28, with chestnut hair that fell loose around her shoulders, and she wore a cream knee-length dress with a clean V-neckline that caught the cold light without trying to. Her heels made a measured sound against the marble. She carried a single small handbag and nothing else. No assistant trailed behind her. No security guard scanned the corners. No name badge sat clipped to her dress. That was enough for some people to misread her completely. She stopped at the desk and spoke quietly to the young receptionist, asking about a meeting on the executive floor. The receptionist, a young man with a careful expression, frowned at his screen and asked her to repeat the name. Before he could finish, a tall figure in a tailored navy suit walked out of the side corridor and crossed the lobby with practiced confidence. Clinton Harrow was 43 years old, gray at the temples in a way he believed made him look distinguished, and he wore his branch manager title like a coat he refused to take off indoors. He had a habit of scanning every newcomer for status markers before deciding how to speak to them. In the woman before him he saw youth, beauty, an absence of company escort, and a dress he had decided was too memorable for a serious morning. Within 3 seconds, he had filed her under a category he kept for people he believed were trying too hard to be seen. "Can I help you?" he said, but his tone was not a question. "I have a meeting with the executive team," the young woman replied. Clinton tilted his head with a small, measured smile. "The executive team does not meet strangers who walk in off the street because they wore a nice dress." The lobby seemed to go still. 2 candidates near the elevators glanced up, then looked away. A pair of staff members near the reception desk became suddenly interested in their screens. A young security guard standing by the elevator alcove shifted his weight and said nothing. The receptionist's hands hovered above his keyboard. Finn heard the words from where he stood. He turned his head slightly. The woman's posture had not changed. She stood there with her handbag in front of her, not flinching, not arguing, simply looking at Clinton the way a person looks at something they are deciding whether to remember. "Sir," she said evenly, "I would like to call the executive office to confirm. Their assistant has my name." "Names are easy to memorize," Clinton replied. "They do not give you access to this building." The receptionist tried to speak up, but Clinton raised a hand without looking at him, and the young man fell silent. Finn felt his fingers tighten around the cardboard folder in his hand. He looked over at Bonnie, who had taken her seat in one of the cream leather chairs with her rabbit in her lap. She was watching the woman in the cream dress. Her small mouth was slightly open. He walked back to her, sat down in the chair beside hers, and tried to keep his voice low. "Stay close, sweetheart," he murmured. "I just need to wait for them to call me." Bonnie did not answer at first. She kept watching. Then she leaned toward him. "Daddy," she said quietly, "did that lady do something wrong?" Finn shook his head once. Then, "Why is the man being mean to her?" Finn opened the folder in his lap as if it could give him an answer. He saw his resume on top, the cover letter neatly printed, and the recommendation letters from his last supervisor at the warehouse he had run for 4 years before his wife got sick. He saw the gap. 3 years where there was no employer. 3 years that recruiters always asked about. 3 years that he had spent learning how to braid a child's hair and how to read prescription labels at 3 in the morning. He could not afford to lose this interview. The rent on their apartment was due in 11 days. Bonnie's medication for her breathing needed a refill at the end of the month. The savings account he and his wife had built together had thinned to a number he no longer said out loud. He swallowed the answer that rose in his throat. He told himself, just for one more minute, that staying seated was the right thing to do. He had a child to feed. He had a job to win. Across the lobby, Clinton had not finished. He stepped a half pace closer to the woman, lowered his voice in that practiced way some men used when they wanted everyone in a room to hear, and said, "I would suggest you leave before you embarrass yourself further." The woman did not move. Bonnie tugged her father's sleeve. "Daddy," she whispered, "if everyone is quiet, what is she supposed to do?" The words hit something in him that no salary number had ever been able to hold down. He looked at his daughter, then at the folder, then at the woman across the lobby. He thought of his wife, of the hospital chair he had slept in, of the day she had asked him in a soft, tired voice to make sure their daughter never grew up afraid of being kind. He had promised her. He had said yes without knowing how heavy that promise would become on a Tuesday morning in a marble lobby with rent due in 11 days. Clinton turned to the security guard. "If she stays one more minute," he said loudly, "remove her. We do not need this kind of thing dirtying the image of this company." The word dirtying made Bonnie flinch. Her small hand tightened around the rabbit. Her eyes filled. She looked up at her father. "Daddy," she said, her voice trembling, "are grown-ups allowed to talk to people like that?" Finn closed the folder slowly. He set it on the chair. He stood up, smoothed the front of his shirt, and walked across the lobby. He stopped at a polite distance, close enough that Clinton had to acknowledge him, far enough that he was not crowding the woman. "Sir," Finn said calmly, "you can ask her to verify her appointment." "You do not need to humiliate her to do it." The lobby seemed to draw in a breath. Clinton turned slowly. He looked Finn up and down with the air of a man who had just discovered an unexpected stain. "And who," he said, "are you?" "Someone waiting for an interview." A short, hard laugh escaped Clinton's throat. "Then you have just chosen the worst possible way to begin one." Finn did not look away. "If this company would reject me for refusing to stand quietly while someone is being insulted, I would rather know that before I work here." The woman in the cream dress turned her head slightly. For the first time that morning, her gaze settled directly on Finn. She studied him the way someone studies a rare instrument. Quiet. Patient. Memorizing. Clinton's smile thinned. Brave words from a man with a child on his arm, he said. Tell me, do you always bring your daughter to professional interviews? Bonnie had crept across the lobby and now stood half hidden behind her father's leg. Finn placed one large hand gently on the top of her head. My daughter is not the reason for you to look down on me, he said. She is the reason I have to be careful about how I live. A beat of silence followed. One of the receptionists looked away to hide an expression. A woman in a charcoal blazer near the back of the lobby pressed her lips together, as if she had wanted, for a long time, to hear someone say something exactly like that. Clinton walked over to the chair where Finn had left his folder. He picked it up between two fingers as if testing the weight of something he intended to throw away. Then let us see, he said, how much a moralist like you is actually worth. He flipped open the folder and read aloud, deliberately loud enough for the lobby to hear. 3-year gap, no current employer. Last position, warehouse operations. Single father. No professional references in the last 24 months. He looked up. You stand in our lobby, lecture a manager, bring a child to a job interview, and expect us to believe you are an asset. Finn felt heat rise into his face. He felt Bonnie press closer to his leg. He felt 3 years of unread emails and missed calls and rejection letters crowd into his chest. He took one slow breath and held it for the count of 4, the way the grief counselor had taught him. I am not asking for pity, Finn said, his voice level. I am asking for a chance to interview. A man who walks away from a career for 3 years, Clinton said, brings a child to a corporate floor and starts a scene at his own interview. That does not prove you are reliable. It proves the opposite. Bonnie made a tiny sound. Her face had turned down toward the floor. Her shoulders trembled. Finn knelt without taking his eyes off Clinton. He spoke softly, but every person in the lobby could hear him. It proves, he said, that I did not abandon the person who needed me. If you see family responsibility as a weakness, then you do not understand what responsibility is. The woman in cream dress closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, something in her expression had hardened into a decision. Clinton, however, was no longer aware of her. His attention had narrowed to Finn. I will personally see to it, he said, that you are never hired in this building. You can do that, Finn replied. What? I said you can do that. But you cannot make me teach my daughter that silence in front of cruelty is the price of a paycheck. For a moment, the lobby felt smaller. Even the elevator chimes seemed to pause. Clinton's face shifted into a flat, thin smile that did not reach his eyes. Security, he said sharply. Escort him and the child out of the building. The young guard hesitated. He looked at Clinton, then at the woman in cream, then at the little girl with the worn rabbit. Slowly, with apology written across his face, he stepped forward. Sir, he said quietly to Finn. I am sorry. Please, this way. Finn nodded once. He did not argue. He bent down and gathered the loose papers Clinton had let fall back onto the chair. Some of the pages had slipped to the floor. Bonnie crouched immediately to help him, picking up each page with both hands, holding her rabbit tight under one arm. The sight of her small fingers pressing the wrinkled corners flat made the room ache. Finn knelt with her. He did not rush. He let her hand him each page as if it were something important, because to her it was. When they stood, Bonnie tucked her free hand into his. Finn turned back toward Clinton one last time. Someday, he said, you will understand that people remember how you made them feel longer than any title you ever held. Clinton smirked. People like you always preach when they have nothing to lose. Finn looked down at his daughter. He looked at the small worn rabbit. He looked at the folder that held 3 years of nothing. I have everything to lose, he said. That is exactly why I have to choose right. He walked out, holding his daughter's hand, the security guard following 2 steps behind. The lobby door opened and the cold air of the street swept inside for one quick moment before the door closed again. The woman in the cream dress had not moved during any of it. Clinton turned to her with a sneer he believed had become triumphant. "And as for you," he said, "if you do not want to end up like him, I suggest you leave quietly." She finally spoke. Her voice was low, even, and carried a kind of warmth that did not match the words. "I will leave," she said, "when I am finished." Clinton frowned. He did not understand the sentence. He was about to ask her to clarify when he saw her open her handbag, take out a slim phone, and type a short message. The message read, "Bring the board upstairs now." She closed the phone, slid it back into the bag, and looked Clinton in the eyes for one long, unhurried second. She said nothing more. She did not need to. Outside, the wind cut around the corner of the building and pulled at Bonnie's coat. Finn led her across the wide stone steps to a low concrete planter. He sat down on the edge of it, set the wrinkled folder beside him, and lifted his daughter onto his knee. "Are you cold?" he asked. She shook her head. Then, after a small silence, she leaned forward and pressed her face against his shoulder. "I am sorry, Daddy." He pulled back so he could see her. "What are you sorry for, sweetheart?" "Because I asked," she said. Her voice was very small. "If I had not asked you, you would not have stood up." "If you had not stood up, the man would not have been angry. If the man had not been angry, you would still have your interview." Finn felt the back of his throat burn. He reached up and tucked the same strand of light brown hair behind her ear that he had tucked away in the lobby. "Bonnie," he said carefully, "you did not cost me my job. You reminded me who I am. But what if you do not get a new job?" For a moment, he could not answer. He looked across the street, at the buses pulling up at the curb, at people walking past with paper coffee cups and gloved hands. He thought about lying. He thought about telling her everything would be fine, the way fathers in books did. But this was his daughter, and she had asked him a real question, and she deserved a real answer. "I do not know yet," he said quietly. "But I do know I do not want you to grow up thinking that money is more important than dignity." She looked up at him. "What is dignity?" Finn smiled, just a little, even though his eyes had gone wet. "Dignity," he said, "is what is left inside of you when other people try to make you feel small." She thought about that. She held the rabbit a little tighter. "Then today," she said slowly, "you still have it, right?" He laughed. It came out thick. "Yes, I still have it. You held on to it for me." They sat there for a while in the cold. Finn began trying to smooth the folded edges of his resume against his knee. The papers would not flatten. His hands were shaking just enough to make the task harder than it needed to be. His phone rang. He almost did not answer. The number was unknown. He pictured it being a recruiter, or worse, a collector. But on the third ring he picked up because he had spent 3 years answering every call in case it was the school. "Hello? Hello?" A woman's voice came through, professional, calm, and slightly warmer than expected. "Mr. Mercer? Yes, this is Hillary Stone, executive assistant to the owner of Northbridge Retail Group. I am calling to ask you to return to the building, please." Finn stood up so quickly that Bonnie slid off his knee and steadied herself with one hand on the stone. "I am sorry," he said. "There must be a mistake. I was just escorted out." "I am aware." "Then I do not understand." "Mr. Mercer," Hillary said gently, "Miss Caldwell would like to speak with you." He paused. The name meant nothing to him beyond what he had heard Clinton say in the lobby. "And she is who exactly?" There was a small, quiet pause on the other end of the line. "She is the person who actually decides things in this company, Mr. Mercer." Bonnie was looking up at him. Her cheeks were red from the cold. "Will I have to bring my daughter?" Finn asked. Miss Caldwell said she would be very welcome. That, more than any title, undid something in his chest. He looked down at the small face with the wide eyes and the worn rabbit, and he nodded slowly even though Hillary could not see him. All right, he said. We are coming back in. He took Bonnie's hand. He picked up the folder. He climbed the steps and pushed the lobby door open. The lobby was different now. He could feel it before he could name it. People who had refused to look at him an hour earlier now lifted their faces. The young security guard who had escorted him out tried to meet his eyes, and then looked at his shoes. Two of the candidates in the cream leather chairs whispered to each other. Hillary Stone was waiting by the executive elevator. She was a woman in her early 30s, dressed in a charcoal suit, with a long, calm face and the kind of eyes that did not waste a glance. She bent slightly to greet Bonnie first. "Hello, sweetheart," she said. "Is your friend coming up with us?" Bonnie nodded and lifted the rabbit a little higher. Mr. Whiskers is welcome too." Hillary straightened and gestured to the open elevator. Finn stepped inside with Bonnie. The doors closed. The car began to climb. "Do I need a lawyer?" Finn asked quietly. Hillary shook her head once. "Not today, Mr. Mercer. Today you are not the one who has to worry." The numbers changed on the display above the door. 12 Thuristai. 20. 30. 38. The doors opened onto a wide carpeted hallway lit by recessed bulbs that did not flicker. The walls were paneled in dark wood up to shoulder height and white above. At the far end, a glass-walled boardroom looked out over the city. Through that glass, Finn saw a long polished table. Around the table sat the head of Human Resources, two members of the board, the company's internal counsel, the operations director, and three senior managers Finn would never have recognized by face, but whose names he would later learn. At the head of the table sat the woman in the cream dress. Bonnie stopped walking. She tilted her head all the way up to look at her father. "Daddy," she whispered. "Is she the boss of the whole place?" Hillary led them inside. She paused at the threshold and announced, in the calm tone of a person who had announced the same words many times, "Mr. Mercer, this is Vivian Caldwell, Chief Executive Officer and the majority owner of Northbridge Retail Group." Finn felt the air leave him. Vivian rose from her chair. She did not smile in a way that was performed for the room. She smiled in a way that was for Bonnie first. "This morning," she said, looking at Finn, "you were the only person in that lobby who behaved like a leader." Behind them, the door opened again. Clinton Harrow stepped in. He had clearly been told only that he was needed. He still wore the smug arrangement of his shoulders. He did not see the room until he was 3 steps inside it. When he did, his face changed. "Miss Caldwell," he said. The word caught in his throat. "You know my name now," she said quietly. "How fortunate." Clinton tried to smile. The smile did not work. He looked at the seated board. He looked at Finn. He looked at the small girl half hidden behind her father's leg. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding," he said. "I was simply enforcing the security protocol on the executive floor." Vivian sat back down. She folded her hands on the table. "I did not come here to be recognized, Mr. Harrow," she said. "I came here to see how my company treats people who are not recognized." She nodded to the internal counsel, who tapped a controller. The wall screen lit up. The lobby footage played without sound. The room watched in silence. They saw Vivian step in. They saw Clinton block her. They saw his finger jab at the air. They saw him gesture for security. They saw Finn rise from his chair. They saw Clinton lift the folder. They saw the words, even without audio, in the shape of his mouth. They saw the little girl crouch on the marble to gather her father's papers. When the footage ended, no one spoke for a long moment. The head of Human Resources opened a thick folder. "Mr. Harrow," she said, "in the past 6 months, your branch has seen 17 voluntary resignations. We have received 4 formal complaints. We have 9 anonymous reports submitted through the company hotline. We have 3 candidates who withdrew from consideration after meeting you. Each report names you specifically." Clinton's face had gone very pale. "Those are exaggerations," he said. "Those people were not a fit for our standards." Vivian leaned forward. What standard, Mr. Harrow? She asked. The standard of silence while a person with a small amount of authority humiliates someone who has none. Miss Caldwell, I have always operated within company policy. You have operated within the version of company policy you wrote for yourself in this branch. That man, Clinton said, throwing a hand toward Finn, interfered in a security matter. He is unstable. He is not a fit for this organization. Vivian did not raise her voice. She did not blink. You see a man who defended the dignity of a stranger, she said, and you call it interference. I see the quality this company has been missing. The internal counsel cleared his throat. Mr. Harrow, he said, effective immediately, you are placed on administrative suspension pending a full internal investigation. Your access to company systems is revoked. Please surrender your badge. A woman in a navy blazer rose quietly from a side seat. She held out a small black tray. For a moment, Clinton did not move. Then, slowly, he reached up to his lapel, unclipped his badge, and dropped it onto the tray. The small click of metal on plastic was the only sound in the room. He did not look at Finn as he passed. He did not look at Bonnie. He did not look at Vivian. He kept his eyes on the floor and walked out. When the door closed behind him, Vivian let out a slow breath, and the boardroom seemed to release a breath with her. She turned to Finn. Mr. Mercer, she said, now we can talk about the real reason I asked you to come back upstairs. Finn shifted Bonnie's hand to his other hand. He did not know whether to sit. He did not know whether he was being thanked or examined. Hillary stepped forward and placed his folder, the same wrinkled folder, on the table in front of Vivian. The bent edges had been carefully smoothed. While you were outside, Vivian said, I asked our people to look at your file. 11 months at Maple Brook Distribution. 2 years at Carter Logistics. 4 years as warehouse operations supervisor at Halverson Retail. You reduced order processing time by 18%. You cut shipping errors by nearly a quarter. You trained teams under conditions that broke other supervisors. And then you stopped 3 years ago, because someone in your home needed you more than your career did. Finn opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He had not heard his work spoken about in that order in a very long time. That gap, Vivian said, is not a hole. It is a record. It tells me that you are capable of putting people above performance when both are demanded of you. That is not a deficiency, Mr. Mercer. That is a qualification. He swallowed. I was just doing what any father should do, he said quietly. Many of the fathers in that lobby this morning were also fathers, she said. They were quiet. You were not. She looked at Bonnie. She came around the side of the table and lowered herself slowly, deliberately, until she was kneeling at Bonnie's eye level. She did not speak to her in a high, bright voice. She spoke to her the way a person speaks to someone whose opinion matters. Hello, Bonnie, she said. May I tell you something? Bonnie nodded. Your father was kind today, Vivian said when he did not know who I was. That is the truest kind of kindness there is. Bonnie tilted her head. Was my daddy chosen because he was nice to you? Your daddy was chosen because he was kind when no one expected him to be. That is the only kind of kindness I trust. Bonnie looked up at her father, then back at Vivian, then carefully held out the rabbit a few inches forward, as if introducing him. This is Mr. Whiskers. Vivian smiled. Hello, Mr. Whiskers. Thank you for taking such good care of her. She stood up. She turned back to Finn. I'm not offering you a position because of what happened today, she said. I am offering you a position because of who you have been every day before today. We are building a new internal division. Its purpose is to reform the operations culture across our regional branches, to train managers in ethical leadership, to create real channels for frontline staff to be heard, and to protect candidates and customers from the kind of conduct you saw this morning. I would like you to lead operations oversight in that division. Finn felt something tighten in his chest that he did not have a name for. Miss Caldwell, he said, I have to be honest with you. I am a single father. There will be days when my daughter needs me before this company does. Good, Vivian said. A company that cannot respect the family of an employee has no right to claim it respects its customers. He stood very still for a moment. Then he nodded, once, slowly. I would be grateful, he said, for the chance. It is not a favor, Mr. Mercer, she said. It is a hire. The head of human resources slid a folder across the table. Hillary stepped to Finn's side and gently took his old wrinkled folder from his hand, replacing it with the new one. The new folder was clean, crisp, and embossed with the company name in quiet lettering. Bonnie looked up. Daddy, she whispered. Do we still get pancakes Saturday? Yes, sweetheart, Finn said. His voice cracked, but only a little. We still get pancakes. A few minutes later, Hillary walked them back to the elevator. Several staff members along the corridor stood as Finn passed. One older woman in a gray cardigan, whose name he would later learn, was Marjorie, pressed her palm briefly to her chest and gave him a small nod. At the elevator, the young security guard from the lobby was waiting. He had been called up to retrieve a parcel and had stayed. He stepped forward and lowered his voice. Sir, he said. I am sorry I did not say anything down there. Finn looked at him for a long moment. The boy was barely 22. He had a soft, embarrassed face. He had been told, every day for a year, that his job was to enforce, not to think. Next time, Finn said gently, say something. The boy nodded. His eyes were shining. Finn rested a hand on his shoulder for a single second and then stepped into the elevator. The doors began to close. Through the narrowing slit of the doorway, Finn saw Vivian Caldwell standing once more behind the long glass wall of the boardroom. She watched the two of them, the man in the wrinkled white shirt and the girl with the worn rabbit, the way someone watches the first warm light reach a room they had been trying for months to repair. The doors closed. The car began to descend. Bonnie tipped her head against her father's hip. Daddy? Yes, sweetheart. I think Mommy would have liked her. Finn closed his eyes. He pressed his hand over the top of his daughter's head and held it there. The elevator counted down quietly, one floor at a time. When the doors opened in the lobby, the cold light still pooled across the marble floor. The leather chairs still held their candidates. The receptionists still murmured into their headsets. But the air in the room had changed in a way that someone walking in for the first time would not be able to name. They would only feel that something had been corrected and not yet announced. Finn lifted Bonnie into his arms. She wrapped one small arm around his neck and held the rabbit between them. He carried her out into the morning, and the door swung shut behind them. Sometimes the person who is chosen is not the one with the cleanest resume, and not the one who knows how to say the easiest thing. Sometimes the person who is chosen is the one who is still kind when kindness might cost him everything. And sometimes, when the world finally looks up and notices, it is because a 6-year-old girl held tight to a worn rabbit and asked a question her father could not answer with silence.